Hello, my name is Carmen Rogers, and I'm one of the Associate Directors within Career Management at the School of Hotel Administration. I'm here with Sarah Hilsman, who's the Associate Director for Student Immigration Services within the International Students and Scholars Office. And she's going to be talking with us today about F1 Optional Practical Training, or otherwise known as OPT. So Sarah, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I have some questions that students have been asking, and so I just will go through each of them individually, starting with one of the most obvious questions. What is an F1 Optional Practical Training, or OPT?
F1 Optional Practical Training is a type of work authorization that students who are in F1 visa status can get in order to do off-campus jobs in their field of study and be paid.
Who's actually eligible for OPT?
So F1 students who are in the U.S. in F1 visa status are eligible for optional practical training work authorization after they have been enrolled for a full academic year. They can apply for and use this OPT work authorization either in the summer before they graduate, or what most students do is keep that optional practical training for after they graduate. We would recommend a different type of work authorization for summer internships.
And how does one actually apply?
The optional practical training is an application that has to go to the Immigration Service. There is an application that they have to fill out. They have to apply for an updated I-20 immigration document from the international office, and they also have to include a lot of other documents along with their application. There's a fee. They have to send passport photographs. They have to send copies of all of their old I-20s, the ID page of their passport, and also what's known as the I-94 record.
And what's an I-20 document?
The I-20 is an immigration document that is specifically for F1 visa status. So when a student first applies and is admitted to a U.S. educational institution, they're issued this I-20 document. They then take that to a U.S. consulate and get an F1 visa stamp. So the I-20 is the F1 immigration document.
What is an I-765 form?
The I-765 is the application form specifically for a work authorization document from the Immigration Service. It can be used for lots of different visa categories. For F1 students, it is specifically used for OPT.
So another question that a lot of students have, once a student actually receives an updated new I-20, how long do they have to actually submit the application?
Yes. Once a student asks for the new I-20 from the ISSO, they must submit that application within 30 days. The Immigration Service has to receive it within 30 days, or actually they will deny the application.
What does a student need to submit with their application?
So some of this I covered before. It is the updated I-20 or a copy of the updated I-20, the identification page in their passport, the visa page in their passport, the I-94 admission record, which they have to print out from a website, copies of any I-20s that they've received from the ISSO previously, and passport photographs and a check or money order.
And you mentioned an I-94. What is an I-94 card?
The I-94 is a U.S. admission record. It is something that is created by the U.S. port of entry when an F1 student comes into the U.S. That is actually the moment that a student receives F1 visa status. So the I-94 is the legal document proving that a student has F1 status.
If a student doesn't have all of their documents, what will they need? Or excuse me, if they don't have all of their old I-20 documents, what is a student to do at that point?
Sometimes that can be difficult. Students might not realize that they should keep all their old I-20s, and so if you're listening to this, please do keep all of your old I-20s. But if you've gone to another program or you maybe lost one of your I-20s from Cornell, the international office at Cornell usually has those copies and we can provide them to you.
Okay. What if the student doesn't have their previous OPT card?
Another element that I didn't mention is that if you have had OPT for a previous degree, when you apply for a new OPT, you have to copy that old OPT card. If you don't have it, as Carmen mentioned, you can just provide the details of that previous work authorization, and that's sufficient for the application.
What is an EAD?
EAD stands for Employment Authorization Document and is just a shorthand way of referring to the actual OPT card.
And is there a cost to actually apply?
Yes, sometimes that can be prohibitive, but it is a fee.
And when should the student actually apply?
The timing of the OPT application can be quite challenging. If you're applying for post-completion OPT, you cannot apply more than 3 months before your graduation time. You are also able to apply during the 60-day grace period that you get after graduation. And another important timing issue is that it can and often does take 3 full months to receive the OPT card. So we like to tell students to apply early, come as soon as you're eligible to apply. For this year, for instance, in a May graduation, students can start applying in early March.
Is there a difference in applying for post-grad OPT?
The difference is that you can't apply for post-graduation OPT until you're within 3 months of graduating. If you are applying for OPT for a summer internship, which we would discourage, but if you have to do that, you can't apply more than 3 months before your first full academic year is completed.
Can you also explain the importance of a return address to our students?
Very good question. So on the application for OPT, the Immigration Service asks you for a return address. It does not have to be your residential address in this case. It's very, very crucial because the government does not allow mail to be returned or mail to be forwarded. So if you move while you've applied and you put in that forwarding address with the Postal Service, that is not going to work for your OPT application. So it's a good idea to discuss what address you're going to use with the International Office Advisor.
What is an alien registration number?
The alien registration number, which they ask for on the application, is the I-94 record that I mentioned, the port of entry record that proves that you have F1 status.
If I complete one degree program, take 12 months of practical training, and then begin another course of study, am I eligible for an additional 12 months of practical training?
Yeah, so I didn't mention earlier, when you do optional practical training after you graduate, you do get 12 full months. And there are some ways to extend that we'll talk about later. And the 12 months that you get is per degree level. So as you mentioned, if you do a bachelor's degree and you do your 12 months of optional practical training after that, as long as you go back to school for a higher level degree, you will get an additional 12 months.
So then what happens if the student gets another undergraduate or a master's degree?
So if you go back for a second degree at the same level, you're not going to have an additional 12 months of OPT.
Do they need a job to apply for OPT?
When students apply for optional practical training, they don't need to have a job offer for that period. However, they do need to be working once they are on F1 OPT.
So the job that they have while they're on OPT, does it need to be paid or can it be unpaid?
They have expanded the definition of employment for optional practical training to include volunteer or unpaid work as well.
Can they begin working before receiving the employment authorization document?
Absolutely not. The student must have the OPT card in order to start working.
Do they need to do anything with ISSO while on OPT?
While an F1 student is on optional practical training, they're still under the International Students and Scholars Office immigration umbrella at Cornell. In some way, you're still a Cornell F1 student. So you do need to continue to update the ISSO with a lot of information, including where you live, what employer you're working for, where that employer is located, as well as what the job title is and some other pieces of information. We have an easy way for you to do that by filling out a form on our website.
Can they extend their OPT beyond 12 months?
There are two specific types of OPT extensions. OPT is always for work in your field of study. And for some students who are in a field that is science, technology, engineering, or math, there is a way to get an extension of OPT for 24 months. This is a new version of this regulation. It's going into effect May 10th of this year, 2016. And it enables students who have just received a science, technology, engineering, or math degree and are employed in that field and whose employer is enrolled in this program called E-Verify. As long as you meet those criteria, you can apply for this 24-month extension. So it's a really nice benefit. It gives students up to 3 years of optional practical training. Now, the other type of extension is called an H-1B gap extension. And without going into too many of the details, it just means that if your employer applies for the H-1B working visa for you, you get an automatic extension between the end date of your OPT and the start date of the H-1B.
Now, you mentioned E-Verify. Can you just explain exactly what that E-Verify process is?
The E-Verify is an electronic verification system of work authorization. An employer has to enroll in this, and once they're enrolled, they have to use this e-verification system for all of their employees. The U.S. federal government really wants all employers to be enrolled in this program, which is good news for F1 students. It means that it's much more likely that your employer will be enrolled in that program.
Now, for students that are traveling, they often ask, can they travel outside of the U.S. while on an OPT?
Once you apply for optional practical training, most students apply around the spring in March of their graduating year. When you first apply and then you travel out of the U.S. for spring break, you would re-enter the way that you always have as an F1 student with your regular traveling documents. Once you get close to graduation, and definitely after graduation, you need a few more documents to be allowed back into the U.S. in F1 status. You have to have the F1 visa stamp that you've always had. The I-20 has to be signed every 6 months instead of every 12 months. And you also need to have an actual job offer, as well as proof that you have applied for optional practical training.
So what should a student do if that student chooses to leave the U.S. while their application is being processed?
Again, if they're traveling during spring break, they don't need anything extra. If they're traveling, then they've always needed. If they're traveling close to graduation or after graduation, they do have to have a job offer letter. Sometimes that's a challenge if the students haven't yet been obtained the job.
Can the student use their B2 visa to re-enter the United States?
We get that question quite a lot. Many students either have a B2 visa in their passport, or they are from a country that even has a visa waiver for tourism, and they don't need a visa to come into the U.S. Unfortunately, if you enter the U.S. as a tourist, you will no longer be able to use your F1 OPT. So it's very important for students to know that you must continue to enter the U.S. in F1 status if you want to use F1 OPT.
What should a student do if their visa stamp on their passport has expired, but they need to travel outside of the U.S. while on OPT?
Yes, this can be a challenge for students when you have an expired visa. You do have to go to the U.S. consulate, as you did maybe the first time or other times, to get a renewal of the F1 visa stamp. And in order to do that, you'll have to have the I-20 signed for travel, the job offer letter, and proof that you've applied for OPT.
Do they need to get a new visa stamp at their embassy?
It's at the U.S. Embassy, anywhere outside of the U.S. One of the things about the U.S. immigration system is you can't apply for the visa stamp inside the U.S., only at U.S. consulates outside of the U.S.
Okay. So a few other questions. In what ways is their application to the embassy for a new visa stamp affected by being on OPT?
This can be a challenge for students from countries that have a high immigrant rate to the U.S. One of the criteria for obtaining a U.S. visa stamp from a U.S. consulate is that you convince the consulate officer that you do not intend to immigrate to the U.S. For students from a country with a high immigrant rate, such as China or India, it's sometimes harder to convince the consulate officer once you have a job and work authorization in the U.S. It is possible, and we wouldn't discourage students from traveling, but you do need to have extra proof of your ties to your home country so that you can get that renewed visa.
So what documents do they need to show at the embassy for a new visa stamp under OPT?
They would need to show the application for OPT or the OPT card. The receipt notice for the application is enough. Students do need to already have the job offer. They need to have an I-20 signed for travel within the last 6 months. And then, as I mentioned, they would need documents that show strong ties to your home country, such as proof that your family members live there, perhaps bank accounts, those kinds of documents.
Okay. Do they still need to get the travel line on their I-20 signed by someone in your office during that OPT year?
Yes, we are still your immigration umbrella at Cornell, so we have to sign your I-20s, and we have several ways that we should try to make it easier for you to do that. You can either mail your I-20 to us and we can update that, or we have a form on our website where you can request a new copy of the I-20 so that you can travel.
Well, we only have one last question for you. If a student has additional questions about the application process, who in your office would they speak with?
We have at least 6 immigration advisors in the international office, and all of them are very well trained on these issues, and we would encourage you to come to walk-in advising hours and ask us whatever is on your mind.
Well, that's great, Sarah. Thank you so much. We'd like to thank Sarah for explaining to us all of the information with regard to the F1 OPT.
Thank you.